Welcome to Hope for Everybody, a channel that exists to highlight people and places that are all about providing hope to people in need. Check out today's episode.
Chandler Fozard with Hope for Everybody, and I'm here with Russell Rice, who is the proprietor of the Burton Hill Shopping Center. And the Burton Hill Shopping Center is where Hope More Than Redemption Church is able to worship and where Hope Prison Ministries has its corporate offices. Russell, I want to thank you for taking the time to be with us on the program this morning.
My pleasure.
Yeah. I got a call from Russell the other day, and he said he wanted to get on the do an interview, and discuss some of the challenges that are faced by those who are on the registry, registered sex offenders. Now, to be clear, Russell, of course, is not on the registry as a registered sex offender, neither am I. But we're involved with ministry to people who are. And Russell wanted to take some time to talk about some of the challenges that are faced by men on the registry in his experience of working with Hope Prison Ministries. I just did a teaching series not long ago, or a seminar presentation at the Correctional Ministries and Chaplains Association. And we're going to make that link available in the comment section on this video. When we post this video, we're going to make that link available for you to be able to watch the presentation I gave at the Correctional Ministries and Chaplains Association called Ministering to Those with a History of Sexual Sin. And the focus, of course, were for those who are on the registry, because that is a large focus of our ministry at Hope Prison Ministries. And that is why More Than Redemption Church was founded in the first place, is to provide a safe space for men to worship. Sadly, there are many churches and many Christian ministries who would rather not have men with certain pasts even attend their church. And not long ago, actually 5 years ago to be exact, we were in a church like that, and we filed a complaint against the church, and we ended up leaving the church because they were not very welcoming to men who were on the registry, or even other types of offenders for that matter. And so when I branched out and needed a place to worship, I started calling around to event centers, and Russell Rice called me and left a voicemail for me because I wasn't available at the time. And he said on that voicemail, "This is Russell Rice, and I know you, but I don't know how I know you. But I know you because you were in my phone." And so he said, "Give me a call." So I called him up, and I told Russell what was going on and that we were looking for a place to worship. And he said, "Chandler, you know, it's just amazing. In God's providence, I was just telling my daughter yesterday I wanted to start a church in this event space that we have called the Copper Wall, because there aren't enough churches that I feel real good about. And I wanted to start a church and give a space to people who may not have a place. And you're ministering to people that I love." And as I said earlier, I met Russell for the first time at a Bible study he was leading in downtown Fort Worth. And it started out being a Bible study that had a lot of business executives and professionals in it. But what began to happen is it became known that Russell had a lot of food and a lot of other things that were available. The homeless community and other people started showing up to the Bible study. And of course, Russell was totally fine with that. But the space where he was not necessarily as agreeable with that. And so Russell was no longer able to have his Bible study in that space. And so he knows something about that, but he has a heart for people that other people would reject. What we like to refer to as the least, the last, and the lost. Or the last, the least, and the loster. I think I'm saying that backwards. But anyway, Russell has a heart for people that are disenfranchised and rejected by others. His heart goes out to them. His heart is filled with the gospel. And he's been leading Bible studies and leading people to Christ and doing his best to be a light to people around him for years. So we're so glad that Russell could be with us this morning, and we want to get right to the point of this interview. Russell, give us something about your history and how you came to be involved in ministry to the homeless, to the rejected, to the least, the last, and the lost. I think that's what it said, the least, the last, and the lost. Give us something about your background and why you became involved in ministry to those people.
Yeah, I would say it's hard to not notice homeless people on the side of the road panhandling. At Camp Bowie and Bryan Irvin Road, there's a sign posted that says, "No solicitation from roadway." and there's a dirt path on the median where people are pacing up and down at the stoplight. It's just a long enough light that, they can look at people and get a few bucks to, go back into the community and either eat or do drugs or whatever. So, well, as a society, we need to figure that out. So I became involved 20 years ago trying to help some of these individuals, and it's a struggle. It's a challenge. Then involved with Hope Prison Ministry, trying to disciple some of these guys in faith. The idea is they get to a place in life where they figure out it doesn't work, and they're on the street panhandling. And then in God's providence, mercy, and grace, maybe they hear the gospel, maybe they come to faith. And then when they do, they need a hand up to start a new life as an employable person. And that's where I became a little frustrated by the RSO, Registered Sex Offender Registry, because it seems like it's counterproductive. And so, as I've talked with you over the years about the situation, I just wanted to ask you some questions and record it in a way that people can maybe have a little more accurate understanding of what it is, what it means, how it came to be. And there needs to be some reform, I think, in our process, our laws as a society, because it's not helping. I mean, it sounds good and politically probably sells, but it's making the problem worse, as so many government well-intentioned programs do. The real world is a little different. So with that, let me ask you, what is an RSO, a registered sex offender? What is that?
Yeah. That's actually a much more difficult question to answer, simply because there is a huge variety of how you can end up on the sex offender registry. And as I gave in the discussion, ministering to those with a history of sexual sin, again, we're going to make that available in the comments of this video, and I really want to encourage you to watch that, because I don't have all of those statistics off the top of my head with me here this morning. But let me just say up front that one of the problems with the question, who's on the registry, is the range is outrageous. It's huge. It can be urinating in a park and somebody walks by and sees it and it's indecent exposure. It can be pornography related, of course, child pornography. It could be just, and I hate to, these are not exceptions when I say this, but I'll give you some examples just from within this ministry that I know of. We had a young man who was 18 years old. When he was 13, he touched a 12-year-old over her breasts, clothed, with her consent. But a mother was offended by that. She reported the young man. He ended up getting sentenced to 12 years incarceration and having to register for 10 years after his sentence is complete. So for the first 20 plus years of this young man's life, he will be on a sex offender registry, labeled as a predator for something that we would have called playing doctor 50 years ago, experimenting, whatever. Not a predator, no violence, nothing forcible. Just a mom who was angry reported him, and a DA who saw a chance to get a conviction. I would like to tell you that that's an exception to the rule, but the truth is that really is a lot of the cases we see for people in the ministry, where you have an 18-year-old and a 15-year-old. And people will say, well, what about Romeo and Juliet laws? Well, there weren't always Romeo and Juliet laws. And for those of you who are unfamiliar, the Romeo-Juliet law is often referred to as consensual relations between an adult and a minor if there's less than 2 years age difference. Less than 2 years age difference, you can fall under what is known as the Romeo and Juliet statute, and in some states it will prevent you from having to register, or it will greatly limit your registration on the registry. So that's the Romeo and Juliet. We have a lot of young men that we see that fell outside of that by literally a month or 6 months, so that instead of a 2-year age difference, there was a 3-year age difference. I remember one time was really funny to me, somewhat sad at the same time. I was talking to a relative, and she was, of course, very concerned about our ministry and working with sex offenders, and she was asking me all kinds of questions, and I was giving her the different scenarios like the one I just gave you, and she said, wait a minute, back up. She said, are you telling me that someone can end up on the registry for consensual sex? And I said, absolutely. If somebody makes the complaint, it doesn't matter whether it was the person. It could be a parent, it could be a relative, it could be a neighbor, whoever. If somebody makes the complaint, charges are filed, and a case goes to trial and they're convicted, they couldn't end up on the registry. And I said, it happens all the time. And she said, and did you say that someone could end up on the registry for a age gap greater than 2 years? And I said, yes. And she goes, oh my God, Chandler. She said, my husband and I have been married more than 35 years. We have 3 children. And he said, but she said, when we met, he was 18 and I was 14. And we began having relations almost right away. And I said, okay, now because that's even more than a 2-year age difference, and it's actually double that, it's a 4-year age difference, not only would he end up on the registry, by law, the statute mandates it would have been considered aggravated sexual assault. It would have been an aggravated charge. He would have been on the registry for life, mandatory, and he would have done 75% of his time in prison before he was even eligible to be released, because there was a 4-year age difference. And
well,
she was appalled.
That's what I'm learning from you, and I'm appalled that our government, well-intentioned as it is, can throw this blanket label on somebody, ruining their employability. So let's say there's a job opening and an RSO applies with 2 other non-RSOs, and the RSO is by far the clear choice for the job, but has an RSO label. How many times out of 100 does he get hired?
Oh yeah, I mean, we don't know, right? I mean, there are some employers we're very grateful that some employers are more willing to consider things on a case-by-case basis, and that's the way a lot of employers are, but not enough. There are employers who will look at things, and there is no case-by-case. The rule is if they have this type of offense, we're not hiring them, and they won't get the job. They'll just be, and you know, the sad thing, Russell, is that 35 years ago, when I was incarcerated and of course not a registered sex offender at that time, but when I was incarcerated for that first offense, and you know, it wasn't a popular kind of offense, but when I got out and I started applying for jobs, I was able to overcome a lot by me meeting with people face to face. They were able to talk to me and get to know me and get references and different things like that and get a feel for me. Now, because everything is done digitally, and 9 times out of 10, you don't even get a face to face with somebody. So now not only does the person have to deal with have this horrible thing on their background and nobody gets to know them, now they have to deal with the fact they don't have a face-to-face interview. They don't get a chance to actually sit down with the person. They just see it and hit delete. We have another young man in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and he was 18 and the girl was 15. And I spoke with the probation officer, I spoke with the judge, I spoke with lots of different people about it. They all knew it was consensual. They all knew it was just a normal kind of Romeo and Juliet thing. But because the mother complained, since it was done in her house, the DA prosecuted him. And because Oklahoma does not have a statutory charge, they called it second-degree rape. So when you run a background check on this kid in Oklahoma, you don't see statutory rape, which implies consensuality. You see forcible rape. That's what the layperson will assume automatically. So one of the things that I really delved into in that video, ministering to those with a history of sexual sin, is the idea that you need to do your homework. If you get somebody who's a registered sex offender, don't, as so many do, assume John Wayne Gacy, Ted Bundy sitting in front of you. Those are the worst of the worst. And statistically, Russell, with regard to the registry, statistically speaking, those type of serial, sociopathic, violent predators make up less than 1% of those on the registry. Less than 1%.
That's not the impression the general public has.
It's not.
The general public is the government's protecting us from these one percenters.
Yeah.
And so the RSO, probably half of them or more have that predatorial bent. And
less than half of them.
yeah.
Less than 1%, actually.
No, I mean the public perceives.
Yes, they think that.
That if there's an RSO, let's be careful and not hire anybody with that label.
Yeah.
And now, as you say, with AI, you get 1,000 resumes at a large corporation, and they put a filter on it, and it's let's disqualify these resumes and narrow it down to the top 80 to hire the 20 we need. They don't even get a chance.
Yeah.
And that's what's so frustrating in trying to help somebody become a productive citizen in society, have a job, and exercise their redemption that they find in faith.
Yeah.
And they're precluded from it.
Yeah.
How do you get off the registry?
So the only way that you're able to get off the registry, and some cases are going to be just automatically excluded from even applying, right? So aggravated sexual assault charges will be excluded. And I just gave you an example earlier of what would not be an aggravated charge, right? There's a couple in Dallas that was on the news not long ago where, again, same kind of thing. I think he was 18, she was 14 or 15 or something. They ended up staying together even through his incarceration. Now they're married. They've been married 30 years. He's still on the registry, still labeled a sex offender, even though he married his high school sweetheart and they've been together 30 plus years. Yeah. This happens. So the way you get off the registry, if it's even possible for you, is you have to go through some extensive independent psychological testing. And you have to pay for that, of course, out of your own pocket. And usually they recommend getting an attorney, of course, involved. But you have to pay for at a minimum, you have to pay for the independent psychological evaluation. You have to have, there's several criteria. You have to be off probation and parole for so long. You have to have no other incidences of any kind related to that. And then you got to pay for the evaluations, and they have to submit the evaluations, and then it has to be submitted to the state board, whatever department that is for that particular state. It has to be submitted to the board, and then they have to make a determination, and it can be denied too. So there is a process, there is a path, but it's not cheap. And so the fact is, most of the guys that are on the registry, especially when they get out, now they have this conviction on them, a lot of them are going to be prevented from earning serious kind of money that it would take, several $1,000s probably, in order to make that happen. So it comes down to economics too, that the reality is, just like with their defense in the beginning, maybe a better attorney could have gotten them off, gotten them less, gotten them not on the registry. Because they didn't have the money for that attorney, they couldn't hire it and get out of the charge. Well, now they're on the registry, and getting off the registry is going to be another thing that's going to be very difficult. Yeah. And another thing that I think is really important to emphasize about people on the registry is that so many of them, a large number of them, are developmentally delayed and have mental health issues that led them to commit the crime in the first place, or were a cause behind them committing the crime in the first place. Obviously, not to say that people who are developmentally delayed and have mental health issues, they're all going to do these things. We're not saying that at all. But it is a large percentage of people that are on the registry that have mental health and developmental delay issues, and that, yes, they do this horrible thing once, but statistically, the likelihood that they will ever do it again once they've been caught, now they're in the system, they're on the registry, is just outrageously low. People don't know that. Again, what they hear on TV is, if you've done it once, you're going to do it again, you're going to reoffend. Statistically speaking, nationally, Russell, the recidivism rate among sex offenders is less than 4%. That is not what you hear in the news, right? We know that even the Supreme Court not long ago had a public decision that they'd rendered in a case, and they said this recidivism rate is more than 80%. That was based on pure propaganda, no data to support that at all. But because it was said by a Supreme Court justice who ought to know, it became the standard, and now everybody quotes the Supreme Court justice who did not know what he was talking about. The reality is that statistically speaking, the recidivism rate is less than 4% on a national basis. And of that 4%, it's less than that commit a new sex crime. The number one reason why sex offenders go back to prison is not for committing a new crime involving a sexual crime. It's for failing to register. This registry we're talking about.
Is it fair to say that an RSO, a registered sex offender, is less likely to commit an offense than someone that hasn't been caught yet and is flying under the radar and could potentially commit a crime in a scenario?
Statistically speaking, this is something I found online by a professional organization, and again, ministering to those with a history of sexual sin. The link will be in the video at the bottom because I don't remember the name of the organization off the top of my head. But statistically speaking, this was a comment I found by one of the experts. Sex offenders have the lowest recidivism rate to commit any new crime, second only to murderers.
Why is that?
Well, obviously, if you're a murderer, you're usually in prison or on death row, or you've been shot in the process, right?
No. But with the RSOs.
Yeah, well, I think
because it's been exposed?
I think there's a couple of reasons. I think one is it's been exposed. I think, of course, prison is not easy for a registered sex offender.
Yeah.
So when a guy goes into prison and he's labeled a registered sex offender, I mean, the fear of him being just brutalized and raped and all that, some of that has become less because of the Prison Rape Elimination Act and all those things that have been put into place. But the reality is, even if he's not brutalized, his time is not easy.
Yeah.
They have to keep their head down. They can't talk. They can't make friends.
He's
very
an
easily.
outcast even in the prison population?
Certainly. In the prison, it's the least of the least.
Why do you think that is? Do you think it's because of the abused childhood of a lot of incarcerated individuals?
Some of it could be the abused childhood, but I think a lot of it comes down to a pharisaical attitude of, hey, I'm better than you because I didn't do that. It makes them feel better about themselves. I remember when I was incarcerated, and of course, like I said, I was not a registered sex offender, didn't have a sex charge at the time, but I wasn't in there for a popular crime either. And I remember suggesting to a drug dealer that there was no difference between him and a pedophile. And it became rather violent very
how'd that
quickly.
go? Yeah.
I mean, I had to kind of get out of there because it was not a good situation. He was getting kind of hot with me, but
right.
You know, he's essentially a drug dealer's preying on kids, selling drugs to them,
right.
Giving them something that's going to destroy their lives.
Yes.
There's no difference between that and a pedophile. I'm sorry, if you're watching this and you're hearing me say there is no difference between a drug dealer, seriously a drug dealer, and a pedophile. You're both preying on people who cannot or will not defend themselves or are being exploited for other reasons. There's no difference between a pedophile and a drug dealer. And so that's that. But in the prison system, they tend to look down on the pedophiles. They're the least of the least, the worst of the worst. And I'm not saying that if someone is a seriously convicted pedophile for multiple offenses against multiple children and they are that 1%, less than 1% of the 1%, okay, maybe there's a sense in which that's a horrible person. But the reality is that, of course, you know and I know, at the cross, the ground is level. And all of us are sinners. All of us are guilty of sin.
There's not one righteous?
There's no one righteous.
Yeah.
No, not one.
Right.
We've all gone astray. We've all become unprofitable, right? So there's a sense in which I think that happens in the churches. That's what we went through with this other church, right? It happens and sadly, it happens even more among churches and Christians. I've been rejected by more churches and Christians than I have been by the secular world. Yeah. I mean, when I think about it, when I got out, I applied for a Christian college and they declined me. But I applied for a secular university and they accepted me.
Yeah, how about that? Right?
How's that work?
Yeah.
And just recently, I had another young man we were trying to help. The Christian college denied him, but the secular university accepted him. That's just crazy.
It is crazy.
So, yeah, it is. But that's kind of what we deal with this registry situation. Is you get these guys that get out there and they just don't realize that statistically the differences between the types of offenders and what makes them different and what's going to set them up for failure and those kinds of things. And that's why the registry actually is under review in a lot of states. There are a lot of states now that are waking up to the fact, hey, with these laws, we're just creating homeless camps. We're creating camps of desperation. We're creating camps where these guys get out and they can't get a job and they can't live. You've got states that are really bad. People don't realize, Russell, and I almost shudder to say this, that Fort Worth is actually one of the less restrictive cities in the country for some of these guys. And but other places, man, they've passed laws that say you can't live within 2,000 feet of a child safety zone. And when they say 2,000 feet, they mean as the crow flies. They mean a straight line, regardless of roads and all the other things. So if you're saying you can't live within 2,000 feet of a child safety zone, and then you define a child safety zone as a church, whether it has a school or not, or this or that or the other thing, you pretty much are putting people outside the city. So you get somebody who gets out of prison. First of all, many times they get out without their identification. And this is sex offender or not. They get out without identification. Takes them forever to get their identification in order. And then they start applying for jobs. And if they're a registered sex offender and they've had to live outside the city because the cities that are there would not welcome them in or let them live there, then how do they get to and from work? Most of them don't have a vehicle. They don't have money. Many of them are without family support because they did catch a case that offended half the family or more. And so they are in a situation where they have no vehicle, no job, no identification, and aren't wanted by most people and rejected by most people. So what are they going to do?
I would think they would not want identification on them because with that identification is the registry. So being an anonymous person is actually easier than being an identified person with a license that can be run by the police to show the RSO status, right? So I got to imagine the panhandlers on the side of the street that don't have ID, that are just trying to get a few bucks for food or drugs or whatever, are just stuck there.
If you're liking this content, don't miss out on future episodes. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications. Now back to the show.
I was impressed with Elon Musk. He made a metaphor that made sense to me. He said our current state of government regulation is like trying to play an NFL football game with 32 referees on the field. They're all looking for a flag to throw, and they're getting in the way of business being able to do their job. And I feel like that's the same scenario here, that the sex offender registry is a valid place to mark the predators that are struggling with this addiction of a sexual sin, a predatorial sexual sin. But it's gone so far overboard, labeling innocuous encounters for other nefarious reasons from relatives or prosecutors or whatever the scenario, that, like you say, it's 1% of the actual registry are the predators that need to be marked. And the harm it's doing to someone's ability to get a job and support themselves and actually be in society and have turned and repented and moved on and started a new life of morality, without that deal, and there's no way to get off of it. So if you were king for a day, how would you reform the RSO? Would there be levels 1, 2, 3, 4? Would there be a way to get off? Would there be a process? Would there be a review board that could pardon and restore someone to a new life where they can get hired? Or what would you suggest?
There are levels already within the registry. There are considered low, medium, and high risk. There's level 1, 2, 3, and 4 across multiple states and different things. I do think that one of the things that needs to be really looked at is that every case needs to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis as to whether or not this is a registering type offense. as we said. The ones that are the less than 1%, the predators, the sociopaths, there's no question that society needs some protections in place. But again, they're the less than 1% of those that are on the registry. So I think that there needs to be, in any time a case comes to court, I think it would be helpful if the state itself had a commission. Because when you think about it, when you prevent people from getting jobs, when you prevent people from having places to live, when you make it harder on them, I'm not saying that their crime may or may not merit some kind of conviction, but when you put them on the registry, you're putting a whole new set of restrictions on them. And if you think about the implications of those restrictions long term, that it could potentially make the person homeless, that it will prevent them from finding a place to live, that it will make it even harder for them to get a job. You think about it from the state's perspective, you're actually causing future financial harm to the state and to taxpayers by putting these people in a position where it makes it harder for them to find a place to live, to be able to get a job, to become functional members of society again. It is actually making it harder not only on the individual but on the state itself. And it defeats its purpose. And so what you're finding is that nationwide, state by state, the states are waking up to the fact, hey, some of these laws may have been good with their intentions, but they're not working out well. They're creating entire homeless populations. They're creating homeless communities under bridges. They're creating homeless people outside the city who can't get jobs. They're finding out that the things aren't working. So I think there should be an independent review board that is responsible for reviewing decisions about whether or not to put somebody on the registry. And I think it needs to be a review board that is made up of educated, knowledgeable people about these types of offenses.
So there's no set way for someone to approach a process that would get them off the registry. They have to individually get a psych evaluation, hire an attorney, appeal the process. There's no board that says to undo a registration. There's only people that put you on. You can check in, but you can never leave. You can check out, but you can never leave.
Texas does have a board. The same people who are responsible for some of the registration process there is a board. There is a way to get off the registry, as I said.
Is the registry national or state?
So it's state by state and national. It starts in the state and then it goes national. So if you're on the registry in a state, you're going to be on the registry nationwide. But again, the standards by which somebody ends up on the registry, the standards by which somebody gets off the registry, the restrictions on the individuals vary dramatically by city, by county, by state. They're all different. So, for example, one city may say, if you're on the registry but you're not on parole or probation, you can live anywhere. Another city may say, you have to be more than 2,000 feet from any child safety zone. And like we said earlier, if you have to be 2,000 feet from any child safety zone, you might as well not even live in the city. You're not going to be able to live in the city. So the requirements that put someone on the registry, the crimes that put someone on the registry, and then once they're on the registry, the restrictions, they all vary dramatically. If there is a place for the federal government to step in to standardize how someone gets on the registry, what type of crimes are eligible to be put on the registry, what types of restrictions would be in place, I could see, and I'm a Republican, so I believe small government is better than big government, but I could see that there could be a place to get a panel of experts together to say, okay, we're going to reevaluate and scrap this, and in order to put somebody on the registry, it must be this type of crime, it must have these types of elements, and here are the restrictions that can be imposed on them at the city, state, and federal level. This is it. And it could be a universal, if you will, or in the U.S., standard form of policy. Because what we have right now is a mess. It's a hodgepodge. I have an example of a young man who was aging out in Alabama. And when he was aging out of the system in Alabama, he would have been considered a violent sexual predator. And because he was in Alabama and he would have been considered a violent sexual predator, there was nowhere for him to live in the entire state. So the juvenile system called me And a judge was on the phone, and a caseworker was on the phone, and probation people were on the phone, and everybody was on the phone to talk to me to say, give this kid a chance. He's a good young man. He needs help, and we don't have anywhere for him in the state.
But he can't live in Alabama.
But he can't live in the entire state of Alabama. Okay? So we get the call, and we bring him to Texas, right? When he comes to Texas, even though in Alabama he would have been considered a violent sexual predator, in Texas, because his crime happened as a minor, he was not mandated to register. He did not have to register in Texas as a sex offender. But in Alabama, he not only would have had to register, he would have been at the highest level of registration. Here's a case in point where the system really failed. He should have had to register in Texas. He was a violent sexual predator. And when he came to the ministry and I began to see the pornography and the attempts to hook up with prostitution and all the things that he was involved in, it became very apparent that he was a danger to society.
He's not redeemed.
He was not redeemed. He was not the good guy everybody said he was.
Right.
We kicked him out.
Good salesman.
Yeah. We kicked him out, and he ended up catching a case for violent aggravated assault on a woman in Austin where he tried to attack a woman, and he ended up going back to prison.
Yes.
He was a violent sexual predator.
Right.
And he should have been labeled as such. And when I called them and said, hey, you're making a mistake taking this guy off the registry,
Yeah.
and when we called the police and when we told them he was a danger, nobody listened to us.
Right.
And, you know, so they drop him in our laps, and then he ends up going back to prison for 7 years. But he's got, this guy was dangerous. He was dangerous. There's no doubt about it. And he still is, I think. I still would not trust him to come back to our program.
Is there a process where the sentence to be a registered sex offender could time out, where they'd say you have to be registered for a year, 5 years, 10 years, but then you're off?
The lowest
and it
I've
goes
heard
away,
is 10 years.
Serve your time?
Yeah. The lowest I've heard is 10 years. I've heard it said that if you finish your sentence, you'll have to register for another 10 years beyond your sentence, and as long as you have no trouble, you'll come off the registry at the end of those 10 years. But I've known people that have gone past that 10 years, and they still have to register. And again, this is where it gets you state to state. Some states would not make you register anymore because you passed your 10 years. Other states will still require you to register for life. Oklahoma is a lifetime registration state. If you've ever committed a sex offense anywhere in any state and you move to Oklahoma, you're on the registry. They don't care what someone else has said. So
I'm hearing you say that one way forward would be for the federal government to address the issue with a reform of the National Registered Sex Offender Database, and then implement...
And the state registration.
And state.
Yeah.
And have a process by which people that are involved in this registry could be evaluated by experts, and then a more appropriate registration period apply.
Yes.
Thereby we could return some people that have become new to jobs and citizenship in a way that's helpful.
Yes.
That's what could happen in a perfect world.
Yes, yeah. I think we're still, as long as we require people to answer yes to the felony question, you know, in some states now they're passing the ban the box provision that forbids them to even ask about background questions or to run background checks. And I'm not saying I'm necessarily in favor of that, because I think employers have a right to know who they're going to hire. And I think things should be considered on a case-by-case basis. But as long as we're allowing background checks and as long as we're having these things that are in place, we definitely need to guard against putting more restrictions that make it even harder for somebody to be able to function as a citizen. Certainly, where you live and your ability to get a job are some of the most basic things that humans need in order to survive. And so anything that we're doing to make it more difficult for a person to live and to function in society is not helpful. It's only harmful. And it's not just harmful to him, it's harmful to the society, it's harmful to the state taxpayers, because then you get in a situation, as I said earlier, where the number one reason why people on the registry go back to prison is failure to register. Because there's nowhere for them to live, there's nowhere for them to work. They end up bouncing from couch to couch. We have a young man right now in our ministry He's a decent young man. He's not a horrible individual. And he's on the registry for something that happened when he was a minor. And he was having a difficult time finding a place to live, having a difficult time finding a job. And he was just kind of bouncing from house to house. And he always made an effort to call the local police. Well, it turned out that a phone call wasn't enough because the phone call didn't document the fact he had called. And now he's facing a failure to register case. And he's one of the best young men in our ministry. And he's facing a failure to register case, facing going back to prison. Even though now he's made the right decisions, he's come back to a ministry where he can have stability. He's come back to a ministry where he's accountable. He's come back to a ministry where he can serve in the ministry. And he actually is serving as a mentor to some of the other young people. So even though he's making some of the wise decisions he needs to make now, it could all be taken away because of that one violation. And it was not a new crime. It wasn't like he was out there preying on anybody. He just simply didn't tell the police he was moving from this address to that address. He told them by phone, but it wasn't recorded, and they didn't make a note of it, and so he catches a failure to register charge. And he's likely going to go to prison because failure to register is something they don't play with. Usually you go to prison.
What's it cost the state to have somebody in prison?
The last time I read, I think the number is like $36,000 a year, I believe. I could be wrong. Could be 24. I'd have to go back and look.
I've heard higher numbers.
Yeah, but it's a lot. It's thousands and tens of thousands of dollars. And that's another thing. Of course, there are cities and counties that are making it very hard for people to have a place to live that are ex-offenders. And by the way, this isn't just sex offenders. In the Texas Apartment Association, there are lots of apartment complexes. If you're a felon, you may not have a place to live. Forget about being a sex offender. Felons cannot easily find a place to live. And if you can't find a place to live, what do you do?
Like Donald Trump?
What do you mean about that?
Convicted felon.
Oh, yeah. Well,
in theory.
I think his convictions were rolled back, but yeah.
Right. But in theory, there are political overreaching.
Yeah.
There's a book called 3 Felonies a Day. And it's written about if a prosecutor wants to convict you of a felony for whatever reason, doesn't like you, political reasons, whatever, the typical business person that's conducting his life in a responsible manner violates 3 felony laws per day. They can find something because the stack of laws on the books is this tall, and just go pull one out and say, you know what, I think you committed mail fraud because you mailed a check to whatever, So it's a problem, no question. Let me ask you, of all the registered sex offenders, what's the ratio of male versus female?
I don't know what the percentages are, but it is low.
What would you estimate? Is it 9 to 1 or?
I would say it's probably more like 9 to 1.
Male offenders.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely a much higher percentage. But there are female offenders, and this is an issue. There are female registered sex offenders, and they can't find any place to live because most of the people that deal with registered sex offenders deal with men because that's the majority. So if you get out and you're a female and you're on the registry, you're not going to find a place to live. It's going to be very, very difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What would you say to an employer that has 2 resumes and one resume is much better other than it's an RSO? How would you advise that employer to evaluate and decide, is that RSO label legitimate and shy away, or go ahead and take a chance and hire that person? Is there a way to evaluate it? Is there a company or a process or a consultant that can advise them on thumbs up or thumbs down on their ability to have this person work there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say this not just to employers. I would say this to pastors. I would say this to anybody in the community. If you come into contact with a registered sex offender and you really want to try to be of help, but you're nervous or you're scared of what you don't know and you're afraid of what might or might not hurt you or hurt those you love, you can do some homework. Obviously, the sex offender registry has public information about what their crime was, and you can look at that for yourself first to find out what is their specific offense. But then you really need to dig deeper, because as we were saying earlier, like the young man in Oklahoma who was 18 and he had sex with a 15-year-old that was totally consensual, his charge shows up as second-degree rape. So if you're looking at his charge, you go, whoa, second-degree rape, that sounds horrible. And it was consensual sex between two kids. That is not a violent predator. So you need to do your homework. Get their story. Find out what their story and their history is. Ask them to talk to their probation officer or parole officer. Ask them to talk to people who knew them when. Find out more information. Ask questions. I remember when I first married my wife, we were having a disagreement over some parenting issues. And she said, Chandler, don't just assume he's doing the horrible thing you think he is. Ask questions. Find out more information. Get the facts. It turned out in that particular scenario, he really was doing the horrible thing I thought he was doing.
But you found out.
But I learned that that was a valuable lesson that I applied to the rest of our lives together. And because of that, my son and I have a fantastic relationship. Because I learned to ask questions and to get some of the facts. So you need to do that. When you get somebody, get the facts. Look up their charge. Ask them questions. Ask people around them. Say, listen, I want to help you, but here are some questions that I need to ask you. The majority of states use a document called the Static 99, and we're going to make this available in the comments on the video. When you guys upload this, Jeremy and Bobby, I want to make this document available to you. It's called the Static 99, and it's the #1 document used by the states in rating registered sex offenders. And it gives you a scoring system. Now, having said that, let me tell you, one of the biggest issues with this rating system is that it is often used by people who have not been well trained in what the terms mean, or what a particular score means, or how to score somebody, there's a very subjective element to the scoring system. So what happens is they say that one of the worst problems of this Static 99, because it relies on humans, it is subject to human error. And so you have a lot of people who may be classified as high-risk sex offender, but they're really not. They're not the violent predator sociopathic types. They're just guys who made multiple mistakes, not sex crimes necessarily. But because the person scoring it didn't know how to score it, it was not scored correctly. But it is nonetheless helpful for you to know the information so that you can make an educated, informed decision about the person you're trying to help. So I think #1, do the research, find out online what the crime is. #2, ask questions. #3, take a look at the Static 99R to go ahead and get an idea of what you think is a potential for that person to reoffend and those kinds of things. And then if you get to know the person, find out if they're honest when they answer their questions. Ask them if they're honest. Are they minimizing? Are they rationalizing? Or are they just being brutally honest about what they've done and saying, this is what I did, I messed up, I'm a sinner, I'm horrible, I committed a horrible act? Or are they saying, well, it was this, or well, it was that, or I should have, it was a horrible mistake? I've been working now with people on the registry, registered sex offenders, for almost 15 years. And there's only one person that ever came to me, and interestingly enough, it was a woman, that really just kind of turned me off pretty bad, and I just had a hard time dealing with her from that point on. This was a woman who was from Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania has no places for registered sex offenders to live, like a lot of states on the East Coast. It's not a good place to live if you're a registered sex offender. She was getting out of prison after more than 20 years, and they called us and they said, hey, can this person come live with you in your ministry? And I said, sure, I'd be happy to talk to her. And she came here finally. We'd never had a chance to talk or meet. Now I won't do this because of this, but we'd never had a chance to talk or meet. And I sat her down and I said, hey, tell me about your crime. And she basically told me very matter-of-factly that when she was younger, of course, 25 plus years ago, before she caught her case, she was married to a man who had basically told her that he was going to rape their daughter that weekend. Their daughter, together. Their daughter. And have sex with their daughter. And she decided that the only way she could protect her was to participate.
Yeah.
She said, I made a horrible mistake.
Yeah.
And I said, that's not a mistake. Don't ever call that a mistake again.
That's not a mistake. Yeah.
A mistake is spilling milk.
Yes.
Don't ever refer to that again
Right.
as a mistake.
Right.
And it was a horrible crime. And it was one of those things that, like, that was pretty rough. I couldn't deal with that. I had to, like, I had a hard time. I had to get other people involved who wanted to help her because I was having a really hard time with dealing with that.
Do you happen to know how old the daughter was when that happened?
I believe she was like 12 or 13, if I remember right. And that woman has since passed away now, the lady who got out. She survived 25 years in prison, and within 2 years she died of a brain aneurysm out here. So she passed away. But it was not the daughter, the mother. And so it was a horrible situation. And she was, I could tell in the way she answered it that she was still kind of justifying. And when she said there was nothing she could do, I said, have you ever heard of a phone, a gun,
911.
911, anything? And she came up with a million reasons. So if you ask somebody their questions and they're obviously trying to minimize or rationalize what they've done, that would be somebody I'd be concerned about giving a second chance to. But if they're honest and if they say, hey, I did this horrible thing and I'm guilty and I shouldn't have done it and it was the worst decision I ever made and I will never get over it but for the grace of God, then I'm willing to listen to them and give them another chance,
In my counseling work, biblical counseling work, there's a definition of sexual abuse. And the statistics show that amongst the female population, by the technical definition of sexual abuse, 4 out of 7 women, girls, are sexually abused in some manner. It's not always father raping 13-year-old daughter.
Yeah.
Not that egregious. That's maybe
Right.
the worst you can imagine.
Yeah.
But it's so prevalent that it's very concerning. The point being, you take a 13-year-old that's raped by her father, fast forward 10, 20 years, 23, 33 years old, what is her worldview? How does she recover from that? Does she become a perpetrator? Does she think that's normal? And does she tolerate that? And if she's in the same situation, does she say, well, I guess that's the way the world works, and she participates in it? It's a downward spiral of sin and grotesque failure, moral failure, right?
Yeah.
And here we are in a Christian ministry that says, wait a minute, there's forgiveness and mercy, but there's also a call to righteousness and morality. And so you can have experienced something that egregious having been perpetrated against you, and you can come to a place where you realize you're a victim, but you're also guilty. No one's righteous.
Right.
And in helping people get to a place where they can live their life having been a victim, but not becoming a predator or a perpetrator.
Victimizer.
Victimizer. That's tough. And you would think society as in its entirety, and the government in particular, would be able to think clearly enough with access to the money and the experts that they would design a process, a system that would be able to evaluate each case by case, and then allow people to get off the registry and have it expire. And you can be on the registry because you're a 36-year-old man stalking women at a university to pull them in the bushes and rape them. You can be on the registry if you're 12 years old and you touch a fully clothed breast of a 12-year-old girl playmate and the mother gets mad, you can be labeled a sex offender. And it's debilitating to both lives. The one obviously needs to be watched by the system.
Yeah.
The other needs a way out to mark it down and move on.
Yeah.
And where's the government when it comes to allowing the restoration process, right?
Yeah.
Have I got that right?
Absolutely. And I would add to that when we're dealing with these people that are on the registry, we always have to remember, but for the grace of God, there go I. You don't know what circumstances. Again, like the case of the 13 and 12-year-old touching a girl breast over, clothed breast. In a situation like that, that literally could have happened to almost anybody. And if I get somebody across from me and I'm interviewing them and I ask them, did you ever do anything like that? I know that most people will probably say, yeah, that happened, when I was young, when I was...
What percentage of the population do you think qualifies for the RSO label?
That's just it. If
90%, 100%?
Yeah, if we're digging into people's past and we're uncovering all the skeletons
everything
in the
they
closet,
ever did,
everything they've ever done, or everything they've ever looked at on the internet.
Yeah.
Many times one of the things that we talk about when we educate our men about pornography is that you can go to a public pornographic website that has child pornography on there. You can go to a public pornographic website that somebody's uploaded a video, and it may or may not survive long, but they've uploaded a video that constitutes child pornography from some video that was filmed in Bangkok or whatever, and it's child pornography. And you've looked at child pornography, whether you realized it or not, whether you downloaded it or not, you would be a registered sex offender going on just pornographic websites. And
so you've heard the term being swatted, right?
Oh, yeah, I've heard that too, yeah.
Yeah, so in theory, I could borrow your phone, and in 1 minute I could download child pornography to your phone and close it, hand it back to you, and then when it's found on your phone, you're guilty, and you have no knowledge I did it, I could swat you and get you a case just by 1 minute on your phone.
Yes.
That's terrifying.
And just for the sake of those who are watching this video right now, let me be very clear. You should have your phones locked. You should have some security on your phones to make sure that just anybody can access your phones. And if you're a parent, you should have every login for every social media website that your child is on. You should know every login for every social media site that your child is on, because you have no idea of what is going on social media. Russell, I really appreciate you being here with us today on Hope for Everybody. And certainly you've been giving hope to a lot of people for a long time. Hope that was given to us in the gospel, right? That's what it's all about.
Yeah, there's definitely a need for hope in this crazy world. And I just like to see the government get out of the way and do the right thing, which is optimistic, I'm sure, but certainly there can be some reform in the system that's there now, and I think you've made it pretty clear what needs to happen.
Yeah, if we wait for the federal system to do it, I mean, that'd be okay, but I think even at the state level, if the federal system doesn't do it, the states need to. They need to get a panel of experts together and really take a look at the whole registration process.
And reform it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then reform the process for getting off, if that is applicable. But if they use it for the people it's intended, there won't be a need for people to get off, because those people we will want on it.
Yes.
But if they use it for the people that are not, they should definitely have a way out.
So there's a need for it.
Yes.
But it's broken.
Yes.
Needs reform.
Yep.
And oh, by the way, it'll save potentially millions of dollars in incarcerating those for
failure to register
when there's really no harm to the public. It's just a technical issue.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much.
I really appreciate you being on the program.
It's always a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
If you'd like to be a part of the show and tell us your story, please visit us online at hopeforeverybody.org.